I thought the worst thing that could happen was losing a hand in battle, until I watched the woman I loved dragged away like property. What came next turned me into a man I barely recognized. It started like any other afternoon, quiet, still, the kind of silence you only get deep in the woods. I was on my way back from a hunting trip, a few rabbits slung over my shoulder, when a piercing scream shattered the calm. I froze. The sound cut through the trees like a knife. I didn't even think. I dropped the rabbits on the spot, gripped my rifle tighter and took off running toward the noise. My boots hit the earth hard with every stride, and my heart pounded louder than my footsteps. That voice, I knew it. It was my little sister Nora. Even though she was just 13, Nora had always been brave and headstrong. She wasn't someone who scared easily, let alone scream for help. So whatever was happening, it had to be serious. As I got closer, I slowed down, careful not to give myself away. My cousin Edward had joined me by then, crouching low as we both inched through the underbrush. Up ahead, we spotted Henry Turner, the head of the Turner clan, and his oldest son, Seth. They were loading rifles with an urgency that left no room for doubt. They were gearing up for something violent. Edward and I exchanged a glance. No words needed. We both understood what was about to go down. The Turners were planning to strike, and if we didn't do something fast, it was going to get ugly. Without hesitation, we raised our weapons. I took aim at Henry, Edward locked in on Seth. The shots rang out at the same time. My bullet caught Henry clean, dropping him where he stood. Edward's shot slammed into Seth's chest. He staggered a few steps, then crumpled. The forest echoed with the sharp crack of the warning signal. It kept blaring for what felt like forever before changing tone to one long eerie blast. That sound, we knew what it meant. It was a call to arms. That's our cue. Jod shouted over the noise. He shoved a musketon into my hands, a squat, heavy firearm made for close combat, and motioned for me to follow him up onto the deck. Chaos had already taken root there. Captain Adams, his first mate, and a couple of deckhands were locked in a brutal struggle with men swarming over the rails. Blades clashed, swords, knives, even wooden clubs. You could tell right away that guns had already been fired. Now it was down to who had the will and strength to keep fighting. One of the attackers, a massive brute, lunged at me with a wild swing. But he was slower than he looked. I dodged to the side, and his momentum carried him off balance. I didn't waste the opening. I smashed the side of his wrist with my handguard. The crack echoed, and he howled, dropping his weapon. Behind him, another man stood, smirking like he had it all under control. He must have thought his buddy had me handled. But the second he saw that guy go down, his face changed. Rage took over. He let out a yell and rushed me, a short club gripped tightly in his hand. Now, while Samuel knew his way around a card table, he was never quite as sharp, or as passionate, when it came to other games. Poker though. That was his thing. Especially draw poker. So, when he boarded the ship and found a group of fellow passengers who shared his enthusiasm, he was genuinely excited. They welcomed him in, and it didn't take long before he was a regular at their nightly games. But things took a turn almost immediately. On the very first night, Samuel found himself bleeding money far quicker than he'd expected. At first he chalked it up to bad luck. Cards just weren't falling in his favor. But by the second evening, his losses were piling up even faster, and a nagging suspicion began to grow in the back of his mind. Something didn't feel right. He began paying closer attention, watching the other players instead of just the cards. That's when he noticed it, a subtle pattern. 3 of the men seemed to lose only small amounts, never too much, never too often. Meanwhile, one of the others, clearly new and visibly anxious, was getting cleaned out just like he was. That was all the confirmation Samuel needed. There was something crooked going on at that table. Later that day, while out on a short scouting trip with Max, they stumbled across a few abandoned items stashed in a hollow near the woods. Curious, they collected everything and waved down a carriage to carry their haul back to their lodging. Once inside, they laid everything out on the floor and took inventory. Among their unexpected find were 3 old pocket watches of uncertain worth, 2 heavy Bowie knives, a couple of clasp knives, a short wooden club, 2 Colt Navy revolvers, and $138 in gold and silver coins. Since both Samuel and Max already owned watches and large knives, they agreed to sell those. Each of them picked out one of the clasp knives, and Max claimed the club for himself. They decided to keep a revolver each. Max tossed his old, unreliable pistols into what they jokingly started calling the sell pile. To keep things fair, they split the cash and goods evenly. Each man pocketed $500 in gold from a hidden strongbox they'd found nearby and left the remainder with the bartender to serve as their buy-in for a fresh start at the card tables aboard a different steamboat, the Southern Queen. The first 2 days on the Southern Queen were smooth sailing. The games were fair, the drinks flowed, and the company was better than expected. But everything changed on the third day. They were docked temporarily, refueling with wood for the boilers. A few passengers were up on deck, watching the workers stack fuel, when it happened. Out of nowhere, a gang of about 30 river pirates stormed the dock and charged the boat. Chaos erupted almost instantly. The pirates came hard and fast, weapons drawn, and with no regard for who they hit. Passengers scattered. Screams mixed with the clash of steel and the booming of gunfire. It was brutal. When the dust settled and the boat was finally secure, the survivors gathered to regroup. One passenger, a retired river pilot, stepped forward and offered to guide the boat back to safety. Samuel, drawing on his past experience navigating the Black Warrior River back in Alabama, volunteered to take over in the engine room. Most of the regular pilots wanted no part in guiding the Southern Queen now. With uncertainty hanging over whether they'd ever be paid, or even make it home alive, they disappeared into the crowd as soon as the threat was over. With no professionals left to run the vessel, the remaining passengers did what they could. They pooled their remaining money and bought just enough fuel to get the boat back to St. Louis. During one final encounter near the end of the voyage, Samuel found himself in another deadly confrontation. The fight was up close, personal. He fired his revolver so close to the attacker that the muzzle flash nearly singed the man's shirt. The bullet struck squarely in the chest. It was impossible to tell what exactly brought the man down, whether it was the shot, the force, or the fire, but he dropped like a stone. The man dropped almost instantly, his body collapsing in a lifeless heap before it even hit the ground. Samuel stood there, revolver still raised, his ears ringing from the sudden crack of the shot. Max, startled by the blast, instinctively tightened his grip on his weapon, but he held his fire, recognizing Samuel's aim had been true. The gunshot, however, sent a jolt through the remaining two outlaws. They scrambled quickly off the road, ducking behind the tree line on Max's side, clearly unnerved. Samuel kept his revolver trained on them, eyes sharp, muscles tense. Inside their camp, hidden in the tent, the two men had laid down their defenses but stayed alert. Earlier, Max had already proven just how dangerous they could be when cornered. One of the attackers had tried to creep up near the tent, likely hoping to catch them off guard. But Max heard him coming and dropped him with a clean shot. The body now lay still not far from camp, an ominous warning to the others. It worked. The outlaws didn't try another frontal attack. Instead, they seemed to shift tactics, opting for a drawn-out standoff. It looked like they were digging in, planning to wait until dawn when the light would give them an edge. That change in strategy suited Samuel and Max just fine. It gave them time to breathe, to prepare. Each side sat tight, taking turns watching the darkness for movement. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant sounds of animals. Then, without warning, a muzzle flash sparked from the trees, and Samuel felt a sharp, searing pain tear through his right hip. He stumbled backward, gritting his teeth, realizing he'd been shot clean through the buttock. But he didn't hesitate. He returned fire, and this time his bullet landed square in the attacker's chest, knocking the man flat. Still, Samuel wasn't sure the man was dead. He approached slowly, pain flaring with every step. When he saw the outlaw trying to move, he ended it with a second shot, right to the head. Cold, decisive, necessary. Limping back to where Max had taken cover, Samuel rejoined him just in time to lay down suppressing fire on the last two attackers. Max had already hit one, he thought, but neither of them could be certain how bad the wound was. The attackers weren't visible anymore, hiding too well for a clean shot, and with no more movement, tension hung thick in the air. Eventually quiet returned. Even the horses, which had been restless and uneasy all night, fell into a strange silence. With no immediate threat pressing in, Samuel and Max took what rest they could, knowing they might have to move soon. 2 days later, Samuel reached the south bank of the Missouri River. There, nestled high above flood level, he found the cave he'd been searching for. It was just as he remembered, spacious enough to live in, secluded enough to hide his gold. He took out $200 in coins from the saddlebag to keep on hand and carefully stored the rest deep within the cave. Rather than burying the treasure, he placed the bags on a stone ledge, pushing them as far back as possible. That spot, dark, dry, and cool, would serve as both a vault and a quiet reminder of everything they'd been through to reach this moment. Back near the house, flames had broken out in the barn. Smoke billowed into the sky, and Samuel could hear the panicked cries of animals trapped inside. With no time to explain and hoping his words would stop any misunderstanding, he yelled out, "I'm not here to fight. Don't shoot, I'm trying to help at the barn. Without waiting for a response, he sprinted toward the blaze, heart pounding, determined to save whatever he could from the fire. Samuel reached the barn just in time to untie the first horse, leading it to safety through the thick smoke. Moments later, an elderly gentleman and a young woman arrived together, and the three of them worked quickly and without panic. By some miracle, they managed to get every animal out of the burning structure before any serious harm could come to them. Looking back, it became clear that the fire hadn't been set to hurt the animals. It was meant as a distraction, a way to lure people out of the safety of the house. A tactic. A trap. Once the immediate danger passed, the older man introduced himself, and Samuel soon learned that the young woman's name was Isabella. She seemed determined and clear-eyed, not easily rattled despite the chaos. Later, she took the reins of the wagon, with Samuel riding beside her as they made their way toward the nearest settlement, Jones Ferry, which just so happened to be where they had planned to head anyway. After arriving in town, they made arrangements for the burial of Mr. Whitstone, Isabella's father. As they sorted through his belongings, Isabella made a surprising discovery. Tucked away in two separate money belts, her father had been carrying $6,500 in gold. A staggering sum. Enough to support her for a decade, maybe more if she managed it wisely. The bushwhackers, too, had been carrying over $300 among them. A grim consolation but a financial relief nonetheless. Overwhelmed, Isabella clung to Samuel in disbelief, her eyes filled with tears, not just from grief, but from the strange blessing hidden in all that loss. Later that evening, while they sat by the fire, Isabella turned to him with resolve in her voice. "Samuel, are you sure you'd want someone like me tagging along for the life you lead? You've shown I can be useful, but do you truly understand what you'd be asking of me?" Samuel looked into her eyes, quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke again, firmer this time. "I've thought about it. I want this. I want to go with you. I'll train every day. I'll follow your lead like I'm one of your men. Please, just give me the chance." He nodded slowly, a reluctant smile forming. "All right, we'll give it a try. But if it ever becomes too much for you, don't be afraid to walk away. No shame in that." From that point on, they trained together every day. Isabella had a natural eye, and with Samuel's guidance, her aim became solid. Her shots were landing 9 out of 10 times. It was easier, of course, when no one was shooting back, but she gained a confidence that had been missing before. By nightfall, they'd wrap up training and settle into their quiet routine. That evening, as Isabella cooked supper over the campfire, softly humming to herself, Samuel couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of pride. They had come a long way in a short time. The next morning their luck changed. They hadn't seen any signs of trouble in days, but as they moved along a narrow trail near the southern hills, a group of about 15 bushwhackers ambushed them. Isabella was up front, steering the wagon, and Samuel was riding about 90 yards behind when he spotted the danger. One of the bushwhackers aimed his weapon at the wagon, but Samuel acted first. With a calm breath and steady hands, he squeezed the trigger. His bullet struck the attacker square in the chest, dropping him instantly and sending the rest of the gang into a scramble. When the gunfire ended, Samuel rushed to Isabella. They embraced tightly, hearts pounding, the weight of everything they'd faced pulling them closer than ever before. In that moment, their bond deepened, not just as companions but as something more. Afterward, Samuel moved the bodies out of sight, grim-faced but focused. He made a silent promise to himself. He would stay within eyesight of Isabella for the rest of the day, and likely for many more days to come. With the last of the sunlight fading, Samuel took a moment to sort through the gear and valuables they'd taken off the bushwhackers. He wasn't expecting much, and sure enough, this particular group hadn't seen much success in their raids. After going through each of the money belts and pockets, he came up with less than $200 altogether. Not exactly a fortune, but every bit helped. That night, after the fire had died down to glowing embers and the camp had grown still, Samuel and Isabella found a rare quiet moment alone. Under the stars, surrounded by the wilderness and fresh from battle, they made a promise to one another, and sealed it in the only way two people could, while their companion Ryan, unintentionally, remained a curious and slightly awkward bystander nearby. The next morning, with a clear sky overhead, Ryan and Samuel rode into town. They had good news to deliver. A man who had recently bought one of Samuel's properties, a tidy little farm, was ready to move in. The buyer had just gotten married and was eager to leave the hotel behind and start a new life in his own home. That, of course, raised another question. Where would Samuel's extended group settle next? He quickly offered up a solution: the cave he had found along the Missouri River. It was remote, secure, and already outfitted to hold supplies and valuables. Ryan, ever the passionate fisherman, didn't take much convincing. The idea of living near the water appealed to him instantly. Still, Ryan insisted on one thing: his day couldn't properly start without a strong cup of coffee. The women in their group weren't about to take any unnecessary chances either, especially not with danger still lurking nearby. So at first light they packed up camp and moved with purpose. But the push to get moving had another reason. Samuel was eager to test whether the women had truly taken his earlier advice to heart. He watched closely as they rowed, noticing how they still chatted and joked, but also scanned their surroundings more than before. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And that was enough for him, for now. If they were going to stick with their current roles and responsibilities, he'd have to trust in the small improvements. Later that day, after a simple meal, they were preparing to leave a roadside inn when something caught Samuel's eye. Two men were climbing into their wagon and poking around the weapon cache. Samuel's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Hey, what do you think you're doing in my wagon?" One of the men didn't seem fazed. He glanced over and said, "We were just curious. Why would one man need so many guns, huh? You planning something?" Samuel narrowed his eyes and didn't miss a beat. "You might not get the answer you're looking for, but if you don't step away from that wagon right now, you're going to get something else, a bullet." Before the situation could cool off, one of the intruders suddenly shouted, "He's reaching for a weapon." Samuel's instincts kicked in. He saw the glint of steel and heard the unmistakable click of a trigger being cocked. He moved fast. "That man's drawing a gun," he hollered, already bringing his rifle up. As he aimed, something about the other man's weapon gave him pause. It was longer than most, with a strange mechanism. Samuel had heard whispers, rumors really, about a new kind of repeating rifle, but he'd never seen one up close. Now, staring down this man who had just tried to rob and possibly kill him, he realized the rumors were real. Before he could take another breath, the attackers were already scrambling away, retreating fast. Samuel didn't lower his rifle right away. He kept it trained on their backs until they disappeared over the hill, his heart still racing, his mind turning over what had just happened. As Samuel stood there, rifle still in hand, a sharp crack rang out from behind him. One of the bushwhackers who had just taken off on horseback toppled over, falling hard from his saddle. Before Samuel could process it, the sound came again, twice more, and with each shot, another man went down. In the end, only two managed to escape the ambush alive, galloping off into the distance. Exhaustion hit Samuel harder than he expected. His legs felt like dead weight, but he forced himself upright and staggered to the front of the wagon. There he found Isabella sitting upright, a scrape along her arm where a bullet had grazed her. Thankfully, the wound looked shallow, nothing serious, but it was a jarring reminder of how close they'd come to something worse. As they regrouped, Samuel mentioned the likely identity of the attackers. "That was the Bartlett gang," he said grimly. "And they won't be looking to collect from us anymore." Max and Ryan nodded in agreement, no one arguing with the assessment. They wasted no time dragging the loot, a heavy chest, into the larger part of the cave, where the air was cooler and there was more space to work. Samuel had insisted they use a proper table for counting, and it proved far more comfortable than crouching on the stone floor. The job was tedious and slow. Most of the coins were in small denominations, $5 and $10 gold pieces, which made the pile look deceptively large. A good portion was silver too, but they decided to sort that out later. After over 4 hours of work, they finally reached the end. It was a small fortune. Enough to give each of them a fresh start, or a second chance. Later they made final preparations for their journey. Ryan climbed up into the wagon's driver's seat, and Samuel's strategy for keeping him safe was simple but clever. Each of the women would ride beside Ryan, one on each side. The idea was to reduce the chance of a clean shot if someone tried to ambush him. Their presence would force any would-be attacker to hesitate, if only for a split second, and that could be the difference between life and death. Samuel rode behind them, keeping watch from the rear as usual. Their destination was St. Louis, with plans to swing back toward Kansas City in 3 weeks' time to check on their holdings there. Spirits were high. After all they'd survived, a strange confidence had begun to settle in, as though they were untouchable. But it was midsummer now, and nature had its own challenges to throw their way. The heat clung to them like a wet blanket. Every breath felt heavier, and the air buzzed with relentless swarms of flies and mosquitoes. Even with all their training and vigilance, it was nearly impossible to stay sharp when you were swatting bugs and gasping for air. By mid-morning they stumbled upon a wide stream, broader than any they'd passed recently. It glistened in the sunlight, the water clear and inviting. Without needing to say a word, Isabella turned and waved to Samuel, signaling their plan. They were stopping for a quick break and a much-needed cool-down. Ryan steered the wagon to the side while Isabella and the others rushed toward the water's edge, laughter breaking the silence. It was a rare moment of levity. But just as Samuel reached down to unbuckle his saddlebag, he spotted something out of place, a flash of movement on the far side of the stream. Instinct took over. His hand snapped to his Colt, fully loaded and ready as he braced for whatever might come next. The man who had shot Samuel earlier reappeared, but this time there would be no escape. Ryan, fueled by fury and a need to protect his makeshift family, became a force of nature. Without hesitation, he charged headlong at the bushwhackers, bullets flying with frightening precision. His shot struck true. He dropped the shooter and clipped another outlaw trying to rally. The last remaining bushwhacker turned and ran, but he didn't get far. A sharp crack rang out from behind. One of the women had fired a well-aimed shot from the ridge. The man crumpled before he could even reach cover. Though they'd arrived a bit late to the scene, the women were finally within range. They had armed themselves with one of the new Mississippi rifles, an impressive piece Samuel had helped modify. The rotating cylinder allowed for 6 shots without reloading, a serious advantage in battle. Even more surprising was how quickly they could swap in a fresh cylinder, just 15 seconds and they were ready to fire again. It was exactly what Samuel had envisioned, quick reloading and long-range power, and the women were just as thrilled. They couldn't wait to get their own rifles. Still, Samuel decided to hold on to the first one for himself, knowing full well he'd need it the most given his position as rear scout and long-range guardian. They made their way into Kansas City a few days later and decided to spend a quiet day in town. It was there, while relaxing in their hotel suite, that Isabella quietly shared something personal. "Yes, I missed my last period," she confessed, brushing a hand over her stomach. "At first I didn't think much of it. I figured the stress, the travel, it could have thrown things off." Samuel's expression softened as she continued. "But I had a feeling," she admitted. "And now I know for sure, I'm pregnant." The doctor had confirmed it just hours earlier, warning her gently about the risks of staying too long on the wagon seat. "If you want to avoid complications," he'd said, "you'll need to take it easy." "Oh, I want this baby," Isabella responded earnestly. "I'm glad you're here to help me sort through it all. I just don't know what I'll do once the baby actually arrives." They had little time to dwell on it then. An invitation came through to board a riverboat while it refueled, and they accepted, spending a couple of quiet hours on board while workers loaded and arranged stacks of firewood. When the boat pulled away from the dock, they set up camp nearby and waited for morning to continue their journey. The next leg of the trip passed without incident, almost disappointingly so. After all the danger, all the close calls, the lack of confrontation felt oddly anticlimactic. When they arrived back in Kansas City, they booked rooms at the finest hotel in town. Samuel ordered a bath brought up to their room, something they hadn't had in weeks. For the first time in a long while they felt clean, warm, and safe. But as they settled in, another question began to rise. Where would they go from here? They had faced down death together, survived betrayal, built something fragile but real. And now they had a child on the way. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about building a life. Anna's pregnancy changed everything. Lily, ever the voice of reason, warned strongly against attempting a long and grueling journey with Anna in such a fragile state. No one seriously considered the idea of leaving her behind either. That just wasn't an option. With the baby expected to arrive by late May, it was quickly becoming clear that a departure for California in the spring of 1860 was off the table. The only realistic plan was to wait until the following year, spring of 1861. They hoped and prayed that the looming tensions in the country wouldn't boil into full-scale war before then. With the growing unease across the land, even that hope felt uncertain. But there was no other choice. Everyone agreed. They would bide their time, prepare thoroughly, and aim for a better window. In the meantime, it was decided that Samuel would make a preliminary trip out west to scout the land and assess the best routes. The idea was for him to go alone or with minimal company, gather information and return with first-hand knowledge to guide the full group later. Everyone pledged to cooperate fully with this plan. Eventually, everything was in place for the big move. Wagons were loaded, supplies checked, routes plotted. But then came a serious disagreement. Morton, one of the leaders of the group, insisted they would need to travel every single day, including Sundays. It was the only way, he said, to stay on schedule and reach the Sierra Nevada before the heavy winter snow made the pass impassable. Several families objected. Sunday was their sacred day, and the thought of traveling on it went against everything they believed in. But Morton and Samuel were firm. The risk of falling behind was too great. If anyone refused to travel, they would be left behind. Eventually, after some tense conversations, the dissenters gave in. Still, tension simmered beneath the surface. Then came a gut-wrenching blow. On the morning they were due to set out, something felt wrong. One of the younger girls, Anna Singer, appeared uneasy, but no one thought much of it. People assumed it was nerves, understandable given the journey ahead. But Samuel soon realized something far more serious had happened. Isabella was gone, and so was Omar Singer. It didn't take much deduction. Omar had taken her, whether by force or manipulation no one knew for sure, but it was clear he had left with her on horseback. The horse was overloaded, meaning they couldn't have gotten far. Samuel immediately informed Morton. Without hesitation, Morton agreed to take charge of the main group while Samuel set out in pursuit. Ryan stepped in to ride in Samuel's place, and Lily offered to take care of the children during his absence. Using binoculars, Samuel managed to catch a glimpse of a group up ahead. Among them, unmistakably, was Isabella. Relief washed over him, but only briefly. Before Samuel could form a rescue plan, the group's intentions became horrifyingly clear. The Indians who had joined forces with Omar forced Isabella to dismount. They untied her from the wagon, set it ablaze, and pulled the horses away at a slow, deliberate walk. Isabella wasn't allowed to ride. Instead, they bound a rope around her neck and made her walk behind one of the riders, her pace dictated by the pull of the lead rope. Samuel's heart twisted at the sight. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a brutal violation of trust. And now it was personal. He didn't know how many were with her or how many weapons they carried, but it didn't matter. He was going after her. It was clear to Samuel that the man walking ahead of Isabella, tugging the rope cruelly around her neck, had likely been awarded her, perhaps in some kind of twisted wager. The other 4 Sioux warriors, meanwhile, were leading the horses that had once been harnessed to their wagon. It wouldn't have surprised Samuel if gambling had played a role in how the spoils were divided. He'd seen enough of that behavior before, especially in tense, desperate camps. But then something shifted. A sudden noise erupted not far from their path. Shouts and gunfire, another skirmish? The distraction stirred chaos among the warriors. The momentary confusion created a precious, narrow window. Samuel didn't hesitate. He burst from cover, rifle raised, voice ringing out clear and fierce. "Isabella, we're here. We're here to help you." One of the warriors turned sharply at the sound, a young Sioux, eyes wide with surprise, but Samuel moved faster. He closed the gap in seconds, tackling the man to the ground before he could raise his weapon. The impact sent them both crashing into the dust. Meanwhile, one sprinted to Isabella, who had frozen in place. "Are you hurt?" she asked breathlessly, reaching for the knot at Isabella's throat. Isabella, though trembling, managed a nod. Her voice was faint, but it carried the weight of gratitude. "I think I'm okay, thank you." Samuel knelt beside them, quickly untying the rope from around Isabella's neck. The red marks were angry and raw, but she was free. Together, they helped her to her feet, the relief in their eyes quickly shifting back to focus. They knew more danger was coming. And sure enough, a second volley of gunfire erupted nearby. 3 of the Sioux scouts, now alert to the ambush, turned back and galloped toward their main force. The 4th scout, the one Samuel had struck down earlier with his war club, had vanished into the wilderness. Whether he survived or not, no one could say. If he was alive, he'd have to find his own way back. The chase was far from over. The path the Sioux now followed led them through increasingly treacherous terrain, jagged ridges, steep slopes, and dense underbrush. Every step became harder, and every sound took on new meaning. Samuel and Juan remained sharp. They knew the terrain offered both cover and traps, and they pressed forward with caution. They had no time to waste. Every second mattered in the fight to keep Isabella safe. The Sioux, by contrast, were beginning to show cracks in their leadership. Their former war chief had fallen, and no successor had yet been chosen. Without a clear commander, their unity faltered. Samuel and Juan, on the other hand, had rest, clear purpose, and the upper hand in firepower. But most importantly, they had something the Sioux didn't, a reason to fight beyond just honor or survival. They fought for love, for family, for each other. The Sioux warriors viewed Isabella as property, something taken, something traded. But to Samuel she was irreplaceable. That difference fueled every decision, every movement. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the trail, 2 younger Sioux warriors had made peace with a new reality. The man known as Blind Horse had stepped into the leadership void. Quiet, steady, and battle-tested, he had become their de facto war chief, and they now followed his lead willingly. Still, exhaustion weighed heavy on all of them. Eventually, Blind Horse and his two followers paused near a shaded rise and allowed themselves a brief rest. The three of them collapsed onto the grass, falling into a shallow sleep that lasted just under 2 hours. By the time they awoke, the sun had shifted. And the hunt, on both sides, was still far from over. By the time the Sioux warriors reached the camp, Samuel and Isabella had already moved on. The trail was cold and there was no chance of catching them now. The warriors searched the abandoned site thoroughly, but aside from a few small changes, everything was just as they'd left it. It was clear the escape had been swift, leaving no time for destruction, or worse. Isabella, though once in grave danger, had thankfully not been assaulted. The chaos and speed of the events had left no opportunity for the captors to commit such an atrocity. In that regard, fortune had been on their side. Meanwhile, Samuel's mood had improved significantly. With the threat behind them, for now he focused on his home life. He gave time and care to both of his wives, ensuring that neither felt neglected. Despite the unconventional nature of their family, harmony had taken root between the three of them. The emotional connection, mutual respect, and shared struggles created a bond that made their arrangement work. Both women, feeling cherished and secure, quietly wondered if they might be expecting again. With the intimacy and closeness they now shared, it wouldn't be a surprise. But rather than worry, they embraced the thought. They loved being mothers, and raising children no longer felt like a burden. With plenty of help and a stable, supportive household, they had the freedom to enjoy their roles. Life, for the first time in a long while, felt joyful. On the third day of their journey, they found themselves back in danger. Samuel spotted a small group of Sioux warriors ahead, camped just off the trail. They hadn't seen him yet, but the situation was tense. He knew he had to make a decision, one that could determine whether the conflict reignited. One of the horses shifted slightly and Samuel tensed. A single misstep could give away his position. Still, he had a plan. He didn't want to hurt the animals. In fact, his hope was that the Sioux would take their horses and ride away, choosing flight over another fight. But he also needed to shake their confidence. And that meant a show of force. He decided a warning shot wouldn't be enough. Taking out one of the guards might just rattle them enough to think twice. He and Juan moved into position, rifles ready. They had 6 visible targets, and 10 shots between them. If everything went right, they'd hit most of the enemy before a reload was necessary. And with well-practiced coordination, it would take only 12 seconds to reload and fire again. At Samuel's signal, they opened fire. The first targets were the most important, their war chief and his immediate second. They aimed carefully, neither willing to waste their opening volley. The war chief, who had been deep in discussion with his fellow leaders, was the first to fall. 2 bullets struck him in the chest just as he turned his head. The impact threw him upright in the saddle. Then he began to slide, slowly, until he collapsed off the side of his horse and hit the ground with a heavy thud. The other chiefs were stunned. They looked around in confusion, not understanding what had just happened, until they saw the blood. One of the shots had struck the chief in the neck, tearing through with brutal force. A thick stream of blood spilled onto the dust below. It hadn't been Isabella's intended shot. She had aimed for the chest, but fate had taken the bullet to an even more fatal spot. The war chief didn't stand a chance. Chaos broke out among the Sioux as they scrambled for cover, and Samuel and Juan pressed their advantage, prepared to follow up if necessary.